There is a great debate about intellect versus wisdom. Now, on one hand, you have intellect, which is very bright. They have very smart ideas, at least in theory. And then you have wisdom, which comes from practice, which comes from application, trial and error, etc., and just the experience of life. Now, the reason why these two things are oftentimes at odds is because wisdom often takes a very long time to gather. So, therefore, you usually get a lot of wisdom with age. Now, intelligence is basically a fast track in order to gain knowledge, because both of them pertain to the idea of knowledge or gathering knowledge. Now, that's where they differ, is that one is through experience and one is through a fast track. And that's not to say that the fast track is bad necessarily. As we all know, you could learn a whole lot of different things on YouTube, or you can learn through the areas of the internet, which I would consider a part of a intellectual thought process, right? But there are some things in which fall into the trap to where many people think that they don't need wisdom in order to be knowledgeable within that area. So, I think that's what's kind of going on in TSM. Not particularly Shenyi himself. So if you guys haven't heard the news at all recently, is the fact that Shenyi has been subbed out the support for TSM, and he's going to be playing an academy, and they're going to be bringing up the TSM academy support. Now, what I find weird is the fact that it seemed like Shenyi was supposed to be the shot caller. The problem is the fact that he's the youngest player on the team. So when you're the youngest player, and I mean, people don't like to admit it, even in Western culture, but we still do have some type of reverence for age. Age has a certain weight. Regardless of whether that is, extremely primitive or old-fashioned, etc., there is still some weight to it, because we know inherently of that difference between intelligence and wisdom, right? One is application and one is just theory. So now you have Shenyi trying to be the shot caller for the entire team, and I don't know why. And I keep hearing on the internet, or on Reddit, that Shenyi was supposed to be the shot caller in FPX, etc. But people overwrite that entire thing of, yes, he was the shot caller in FPX Academy, LDL, right? So that's not equivalent. And then on top of that, he only had, I think it was less than 5 games with the actual FPX squad in the LPL. So he doesn't even have that much experience on the main stage. So really, you're expecting the youngest player on the entire team, in order to lead this team and tell them what they need to do as far as learning about what objectives they need to go for, or learning how they need to position on the map, etc., or to get vision at certain areas in the pockets, of the enemy, or to invade with the jungler. That seems like a very tall task to me, just regardless of, whether he is older or not, just coming over into North America and having to do that on top of his age. So with that, then you combine the problem of who is supposed to be the no man on the team, right? So there's like the hype man, the person that is like all gung-ho for all the different plays and plays very aggressive, etc. But where is the no man? Look at all the lanes. Tell me, who is the no man in any of the lanes? Huni has historically been super hype. You have Spica, who is hype himself. You have Kaido, who is hype as well and very aggressive. You have Tactical, who is quite aggressive as well too. Who is supposed to be like this no guy to say, no, we should calm down? Even Shenyi is also hype. So who is supposed to calm this entire team down to where they don't make bad decisions? That's what I want to know. When you develop a roster like this, you need someone to be the no man. And I take this partially from there was I think it was an interview with Doublelift when he was talking in Team Liquid about Xmithy. When Xmithy left Team Liquid, was the fact that Xmithy was the no man, right? And this was something that Core JJ also corroborated as well. And I've said this before, is the fact that it's very important to have a no man. And Xmithy was the no man to say, no, we shouldn't go for this play. Hey boys, calm down. Let's focus. Let's, get on task. Let's start going for these objectives and stuff. Stop going for kills. Like, let's get on fucking point. Why do you think he's one of the most winningest junglers in, like Western history or in North America? So with so many young players, it is probably incredibly difficult to focus. And I think therein lies the problem with this TSM lineup, is the fact that, yes, it does look like they have the skill in order to hang, with the big boys as far as like laning is concerned. But when it comes to objectives or when it comes to trying to get things on the map, they seem discombobulated, right? They seem like they don't know themselves and, their head from their body. And that becomes a big problem. And as such, and I don't want to put too much of a stereotype on the idea of the difference of age, but generally people consider when you're younger is the fact that you are in your exploratory phase. And when you're in that phase, that means that you try a whole bunch of different things. Your mind is kind of everywhere, and you're trying to just experiment and do a whole bunch of different shit all at once, which means that you don't really have focus, which means that you oftentimes get distracted as well. So now you have an entire team that is full of that, and you have a barely functioning adult in Huni, in the fucking top lane, who constantly kills himself, or historically has been. He's gotten a lot better than that. I still harp back to that because I have a grudge with that shit. But not my favorite playstyle. But still, so I think that is the biggest problem with just the entire construction of the roster itself. Now, on top of that, you have communication. This is a big, big, big problem because support is supposed to be a fundamental role for communication. If the support can't communicate exactly where he wants to ward, right, because you don't want to go solo warding in the enemy jungle, and if you need to go with your jungler, then you need to be able to communicate exactly when you need to go with your jungler. You need to be able to communicate the dragon and how you want to set up the dragon as far as if you guys want to take it or not. And then also coordinating dives, which happen a lot in the bot lane. So support communication cannot be understated. I think that role is more about communication than anything else. Mechanics, fuck it. Don't care. Like how you do in lane, fuck it. Don't care. I care how you communicate with the entire team and how you kind of take reign over the team and decide exactly how you guys are going to play out the mid game or how you're going to play out the late game, etc. Now, you might be saying, oh wait, Izento, like if communication is so important, then like why the difference between Cloud9 and TSM? Well, the difference is, of course, like the roles in which communication is fundamental. You have a someone from the LPL, from China, as a support, and then you have top laner who is also from China, and so they can't speak, from mid lane who can't speak that well of English, right, on TSM. And then on Cloud9, you have someone in the top lane, right, which is very isolated. And then you have someone as ADC, which is just an aimbot. So, like, really, you can't compare the two. And then on top of that, LS always says, well, like, the game has a specific language anyways. So you don't even actually need to speak incredibly fluent in order to be able to talk about the game or communicate about the game. And yes, I agree with that. As far as that is concerned in the loosest terms, but he also has players that don't need to communicate in the most sophisticated ways because of their particular roles. But not only that, but the reason why I don't agree with that entire philosophy is because in VOD review, that's where you actually get on the same page as your teammates. That's where you're able to discuss the nuances, which then requires an abstraction, or rather a more developed mastery of the language itself. So it's not the fact that, you know, communicating in the game is very difficult for someone that doesn't speak English quite well. It's in the VOD review. It's talking about your own thoughts, your own theories about the game itself. That's when it becomes complicated. And when you have an ADC, you know, who doesn't really speak English quite that well, it's not a problem. When you have a top laner who's isolated for the most part, it's not that big of a deal. So therein lies the difference between Cloud9 and TSM. Now, I do believe that once again, management is to blame within TSM. You know, you have basically the exodus of what has become TSM, right? You have Lena, who left from upper management as president, vice president, president. You have Myth, one of their biggest streamers and one of the biggest Twitch streamers in the entire space. You have Parth, who has left now and who is basically the general manager. He was a coach. He was in part for scouting development. This guy basically ran the entire business. And then you have Bjergsen, the co-owner, you know, the person who gave up their shares, the star mid laner who turned coach to try and resurrect the team, etc. Like, you have that entire core just leaving all of a sudden. And then, if I'm not mistaken, I think K's is like, this is like part of his last time within TSM 2. Not sure about that, so don't quote me on it. But it's clear that TSM has consistently dropped the ball on management. Bjergsen had never had an adequate coach basically in his entire career. TSM hasn't had an adequate coach throughout their entire fucking organization. I would, you know, say besides Loco Doco, but, you know, people are going to fucking have their qualms about him, whatever. So, yes, this is a management fault. This is something to where you clearly see that the players themselves don't have the problem. It's how they are melded together and how they, you know, develop as a cohesive unit. And that's clearly not happening. So what I don't get with that, though, is how they've given up so early. It is now going into week 3. They are winless, sure, but it's only week 3. Maybe you pull the plug after week 3, but certainly before, it just seems very strange. Like, you knew this was going to be tough. You knew it was going to be tough to bring in players from the LPL region and stick them over in America, because that really hasn't been done, right? You know, besides moving an entire team over here, right? Shout out LMQ. So you knew it was going to be tough, and you're taking out Shenyi too early. Now, if it was at his request, then you have to consider, well, what made it at his request, right? What made it to where he feels so uncomfortable to where he can't function on the LCS team? Like that's like, you can't just say, oh, just because the guy requested it, that means that it's okay. It's like, and you brush your fucking hands of it. It's like, no. Now you have to consider, well, what in the organization actually compelled him in order to do this and think it's a good idea. That's where you have to take it. And this young kid being a shot, I can't believe it. He was born after the year 2000. Like, how nuts is that? I don't know. I think it's bonkers. But is that he had cited, I guess, and this was like anecdotally going off the TSM subreddit, so take this with a grain of salt, but that his teammates were losing faith in him. Now, if you remember that phrasing, that phraseology, is that High had the same problem. So back in Cloud9, back in the day, High noticed that his team was losing faith in his calls, and he started to lose his grip on how the team functioned, and suddenly everyone was kind of doubting his calls. And then you had a malfunctioning Cloud9 to where they didn't know really what to do come towards the mid game or the late game because they didn't really trust High's calls. And once he knew that, he was just like, okay, this team is kind of done. Like, no one trusts me. And that's a really big problem, to lose faith in your teammates. So I could see where Shenyi is coming from if that is to be true. And on top of that, I think as like a back trend of TSM themselves is that they've been known to rate scrim wins and practice highly. And so when you do that, and when you rate scrims and winning scrims very highly, that creates a culture to where if you go on a losing streak, it's very devastating, and it crushes everybody's morale. It crushes the coaching staff's morale. Everyone is expecting to win, even though that's not the point of scrims to begin with anyway. So you're just practicing inefficiently and incorrectly, just objectively incorrectly, which is like fundamentally what I've had a problem with TSM as an organization to begin with, as far as their coaching staff and how they view practice itself. So when you have that entire team environment, it just sounds very bad. And I don't think this is setting up these guys for success. And as historically has been, TSM are not that great with rookies or treating rookies quite appropriately in the past. And I just think this is a recipe for disaster, but I don't know what they were expecting, or rather if they were expecting to ramp up almost immediately and crush, these Western mid laners, or, these Western support players. Like, it's completely unrealistic. And so I think this entire disaster just devolves down, or rather lays the responsibility on the shoulders of the entire management.